a part of the community, a part of the people, a part of the state.
There have been a number of stories that have had enormous impact on the state and on the people of the state. There have been campaigns we've picked up and run with that have led to laws being changed.
Just crouch down a little bit more.
About 4 wars. There was the South African War, the World War I, World War II, Vietnam.
Its one objective always has been to do the best it could for the people of Western Australia.
This year sees the Sunday Times celebrating its 100th anniversary. Over the decades, the Sunday Times has written and become part of Western Australian history. But more than that, it's become part of our tradition, part of our way of life.
In the beginning, its slogan was the people's paper, and that's how it's wanted to be known. For almost 1 million Western Australians, Sunday just wouldn't be Sunday without the Sunday Times.
The Sunday Times has had a bit of a reputation for what we now call investigative journalism. Although it hasn't been always called that, it's just been called good reporting, really.
There's been some notable campaigns in the 1950s. For instance, the Sunday Times was campaigning against SP bookies, outdated liquor laws. It was for years agitating to get the Commonwealth Games in Perth, which eventually happened in 1962.
But the paper was campaigning much earlier than that, and this is the man who started it all, Frederick Charles Vosper. The paper's first edition was an interesting concoction of news, adverts, comment and self-congratulation.
There was an unfortunate aspect of his crusading journalism. He, for some reason, possibly partly personal, partly because of sense of public duty, he was very antagonistic towards the engineer C.Y. O'Connor.
C.Y. O'Connor was the man who designed Fremantle Harbour and dreamt up the Goldfields water pipeline scheme. O'Connor was a man of vision. However, Vosper saw him as a threat. For months under the guidance of Vosper's poison pen, the paper ruthlessly attacked O'Connor, suggesting that the pipeline was a disaster waiting to happen, that it would rust, and that the dam would burst and flood the town of Guildford. But it was Vosper who had the disaster. At just 31 years, he developed peritonitis and died.
Despite his death, the paper survived and flourished, and the attacks on O'Connor continued, the worst accusing him of being on the take.
It's openly rumoured everywhere that this Shire engineer from New Zealand has absolutely flourished on palm grids. He's robbed the taxpayers of this state out of millions.
On March the 9th, 1902, C.Y. O'Connor rode his horse into the sea at Fremantle and shot himself. Until now, O'Connor's suicide note has been locked away in the Batty Library and has never been seen on TV.
I feel that my brain is suffering, and I'm in great fear of what effect all this worry may have upon one. I have lost control of my thoughts.
So those were the early intriguing days of the Sunday Times. A lot of newsprint has gone through the presses in the past 100 years. Much of the paper has changed, but much has also stayed the same.
When we put the paper together, our week starts on a Tuesday, where we have a conference with the Chief of Staff, the deputy editor, the news editor, the pictorial editor. We discuss things that we know we're going to do. We discuss things that we think might happen.
But the kid like to see later on.
Yeah, it doesn't have to go at any particular time. But
Yeah, but the thing is, I don't think it's a joke as far as he's concerned, because they have actually gone into, so he's saying, they've actually gone into through bedroom windows.
It's conferences like these which have decided what has made news and subsequently what has made history.
In 1919, still under control of its second owner, the Sunday Times introduced a section for the man on the land, a motoring section, and what he called the ladies' pages, all of which still survive in some form today.
Check this out.
just come down a little bit. Whenever you're ready. That's it.
Just flip hair out because you've got really good hair.
200 ASO.
Yeah, if you lean back even a bit, it doesn't freeze.
During Wednesday, the sub-editors are busy producing the Sunday magazine, the feature sections, home section and so on, while our reporters are starting their active gathering of the news.
I won't get the move.
That's great, you know.
And in this crazy, fast-paced world, we don't have time for people like we used to. We don't have time for one another, but people have all got stories and all want to be listened to, and there's some fascinating yarns out there.
I'm a social writer. I'm not a gossip columnist. I just give an overall view of what's happening in Perth, where I've been. People, they need to know they're being at the right function. They need to know that if they spend money on getting there and buying an evening gown or hiring a suit was all worthwhile. And I just sort of think it's one of the happiest pages people can read about.
Over the century, the Sunday Times has also broken some major stories. In the 20s, there was a horse called Farlap. The campaign continued for secession, independence for WA. And the paper brought news from far and near.
Well, I've been in the business for over 30 years in the UK and here. And in that time, there's been a tremendous change, not only in newspapers, but in the people who write them.
For a start, it's got a lot quieter. There used to be a clatter and an urgency and a sense of things being done, and now it's fairly quiet and, well, almost mechanical.
I mean, there was a time when it was sort of, you know, you had this notion of the chap with a fag on one hand and a beer in the other.
Characters have disappeared from journalism. Not completely, but the old characters of all newspapers, every newspaper had them. Smoking, boozing, hard-working, hard-drinking reporters and sub-editors. There's very few of those characters left.
One of the early owners said that the best way to fight corruption was to expose it.
And some early journalists took up the call vigorously.
Lawrence Turner, who went to work at what was then the Claremont Lunatic Asylum,
and went essentially undercover in today's parlance for 4 weeks, working as an orderly around the hospital. That article itself forced a Royal Commission.
And led to quite significant mental health reforms.
During the Big Depression of the 30s, the Sunday Times changed hands for a third time. The new owners, John Simons and Victor Courtney, and with them came an interest in sport. Today, the Sunday Times covers as many as 25 sports per edition. But of course, the biggest coverage is of Aussie rules.
We travel to cover Dockers games, Eagles games, which to me is your bread and butter coverage of through the winter.
But it's a little-known fact that if it wasn't for the Sunday Times, the Eagles and the Dockers could be soccer or rugby teams. You see, it was the Sunday Times co-owner John Simons who promoted Australian rules football through the Young Australia League, which he founded, and saved the game from being smothered by foreign codes. And as the weekend approaches, sport becomes as important for the editorial team as news.
On a Saturday, we're very oriented towards the sport, so the sport starts to run the paper after a bit.
I think the importance of sporting is, well, it's critical because sport revolves around the weekend, and you know we give a very broad coverage of sport, and a lot of people I know read a newspaper from the back. I know the front end of the paper is very important, but a lot of people read it from the back because they believe on a Sunday morning that's what the newspaper's all about.
So the battle to save Aussie rules in the West was led largely by the Sunday Times. It was during this time that another battle was raging, one that also received huge coverage in the paper. It was the battle for freedom, World War II. After the end of the Second World War, Courtney and Simons held on to the Sunday Times for almost 10 years. But their time as owners of the state's first Sunday paper was drawing to a close, and a new era was about to dawn.
Young kind of teenager.
Saturday morning, we stretch people from 7 o'clock throughout the day. The staff is spread throughout the day because we have a long day to 1 o'clock on Sunday morning to cover. That is the real news day. That's our one window of opportunity for the week to get something as it's happening. So we monitor what's happening around town very closely on that day.
It's different than being on a daily paper, and having been on both, I mean, you've learned the differences.
The most challenging part, I think, is thinking differently from the way you would think if you're working on a daily paper where it's happening instantly. You basically know that by the end of the day you've covered the day's news.
I think that the Sunday Times fills in the blanks between what television has reported and what people have picked up from the television.
I personally thought...
We know the size of the paper, we know what we've got to fill, and we can then really hone the direction and the effort that's being put in on each story.
The direction of the Sunday Times changed dramatically in 1953 when it was bought by its fourth and current owner.
The Sunday Times was the first paper that Mr Murdoch bought after Adelaide.
With his ownership, Western Australians were promised a vigorous expansion and the finest Sunday newspaper in Australia.
I think about that time, that's in the early 1950s, newspapers were changing, and Mr Murdoch certainly changed this one.
The Sunday Times is home delivered in every suburb of the city and at every major country town. There is more time for more people to read on Sunday. And the Sunday Times of Perth is read every Sunday by more than 150,000 families.
In those early days, Murdoch would fly in himself from Adelaide on a Friday night to put the paper to bed.
This chap came up and asked if the paper was on sale. I said, yes, it's out now. I think it was about 35 cents in those days. And he went and said, OK, then I'll have one, took one, and the next thing the managing director appeared from round the corner, and there was all the big kerfuffle, and happened to be Rupert Murdoch.
So, after paying hundreds of thousands for the paper, old Tom made him pay another 35 cents.
I didn't even know who he was.
He was a very enthusiastic sort of chap. He would have only been, as I said, in the late 50s, he would have been 26, 27 sort of thing. He'd sit down and work alongside you.
And almost a decade later, Rupert Murdoch added something to the Sunday Times which changed it forever.
1962 was the start of the Reader's Mart, the classified section of the paper. And prior to that, the Sunday Times carried no classified advertising at all.
Good morning, Reader's Mart. This is Linda.
Yes, good morning. I would like to have advertised my car, please.
Your car?
Yeah.
Certainly. What's your phone number, please? I guess the beginning started off with, half a dozen people. So, here we are today with over 150 people and, a thriving classified. I'd like to make that in a slightly larger print.
While the Reader's Mart is commercially the most significant thing to happen to the paper, it's the news that people remember. And in news, the unexpected can and often happens, as it did on August 31st this year, with the tragic death of the Princess of Wales.
Well, the thing is, have you got the picture or haven't you? Do we need to send it again?
We have had some time to prepare for this, although it's happening right on our deadline, which doesn't make it easy, but that's what it's all about.
Time's the enemy, as usual, Michael. Time's the enemy. But first it destroys the problem, The picture we want, I was hoping we'd get right from the outset, was Prince Harry, Prince William walking behind the gun carriage.
Never fading with the sunset when the rain set in, and your footsteps will always fall here along England's greenest hill. This will be the biggest, one of the biggest stores we've had for God knows how long. Your legend ever will.
Until the death of Diana, the paper's biggest international story was another tragedy, the assassination of John F. Kennedy.
And the story broke on a Saturday morning and we got a call to come into work and increase the size of the paper and put a wrap around, a pictorial wrap around the paper.
It was probably the last event involving an American president which was not shown on television.
All that Saturday, different pictures coming through on the wire services and updates on the story, because when it was first hit the wire services, he wasn't dead.
Yeah, these were grams, the grams that were sent all around the world. And for those days, the reproduction was quite good. And of course, it was the moment of the day.
The moment of the day for the Sunday Times locally, according to Don Smith, was its push for the WA Inc. Royal Commission.
With revelations on what was going on, payments that were being made, mainly by our reporter Martin Saxon.
The company committed itself to run that story, believing not only in the story but in me as a journalist who'd put it together, because there are a lot of things they had to take on trust. They had to believe that the information I had was correct, because there was no paperwork to produce at that stage. And I could have been a complete lunatic in making it up. But they stood with me.
I was guilty of no impropriety and certainly no illegality.
The stories that we brought, which forced the Royal Commission, in a sense were very simple stories to write. They were just very difficult to get.
It gives me great pleasure to extend to you all a warm welcome to a celebration of the Sunday Times centenary.
The Sunday Times is a paper that takes its role very seriously. We're here and can only justify our presence here if we serve all the people of Western Australia with all the news and present that news, and not only in the most readable and entertaining form possible, but also in the most honest form.
Saturday afternoon.
See you, Joe.
6:30. The first edition is rolled, and the editorial team leaves the paper to the printers.
This is where we wind down after a hard day's work at the office. Oh, right.
If I didn't come in here now, it wouldn't be there tomorrow.
What about you, Roscoe?
I've got something else. Okay.
It's been an eventful century of Sundays as the Sunday Times has moved from old-fashioned typewriters and presses to the computer age. And as the paper's blank pages are filled with stories and pictures that will become tomorrow's history, we're left with the question, where to next?
Pictures from Mars are good. Better in colour, of course. But they'll be happening soon. Believe me, I know.
It's Good News Week. Someone's dropped a bomb somewhere, contaminating atmosphere and blackening the sky. It's Good News Week. Someone's found a way to give the rotting dead a will to live, go on and never die. Have you heard the news? What did it say? Who's won that race? What's the weather like today? It's Good News Week. Families shake the need for coal by stimulating birth control. We're wanting less to eat. It's Good News Week. Doctors finding many ways of wrapping brains in metal trays to keep us